All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to be having a conversation today about focus. This is the 10th month in the year-long Foundations project. And the purpose of this month was to have a theme or a focus on both the sort of ability to concentrate and stay on task, and also how we make decisions about what things truly matter. So I'm joined here with my lovely wife, Zaritza, and we're going to have a conversation about how the month went and some of the books that I read.
That's right. And you wrote about how the second month was productivity.
Mhm.
So we were all working on being more organized
Mhm.
and setting up these systems. But obviously, you can write out all the things that you need to do in the day or all your goals. And to really get anything done, you have to figure out what to focus on, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was something that I feel like I kind of recognized as not maybe a defect in getting things done, but an issue I had with getting things done when I think back like 20 years ago when I first encountered the system. So when I first encountered getting things done, I thought, well, this is great, but the problem is that it doesn't like naturally lend itself to any kind of prioritization. So you write down all of your tasks, project ideas, and it very much encourages you to be expansive in this aim so that like if you get some idea, you're capturing it somewhere. But the end result is that you just have this like formidable list
Hmm.
of possible projects and tasks and to-do items. And so as a practical reality, like it's very easy to like look at this list and just feel paralyzed, just feel like I don't know what to work on. And that can either result in not doing anything. So you procrastinate because you feel like you have too much stuff to do, you're overwhelmed. Or I think a more common symptom of this is that you get into like task checking mode. So you do a lot of work because it's on your list, but there's not a great deal of concern with like, is this the most important thing for me to be working on right now? And I think for most of us, I think especially those of us who have, busy lives and responsibilities and things like this, you are not in fact going to be able to get it all done. And because you're not in fact going to be able to get it all done, if you just approach your list in this sort of unordered fashion where you just work on things in any random order, there's going to be important things that just don't get finished. And so I think this was something I recognized very early on. And I realized that having like the weekly reviews, the daily reviews, having like little segregated out weekly and daily lists were very important. But my experience working with the students in the productivity month through this sort of kind of modified getting things done keystone habit really underscored for me that it's not just me. This is a reality for a lot of people that you can capture everything, but that doesn't absolve you of the need to like make decisions about what you need to focus on, what you need to do first, what's the priority.
Yeah. When did you realize that you're really good at this? Because we know you are. Everyone that has been watching you for a while, you're very good at staying focused. You're very good at prioritizing things and working on different types of projects without really being that distracted. When did you realize that you're like, "Oh yeah, I can do this. I can."
Well, I don't know. I think it's a bit incorrect to kind of say that I'm just like good at this across the board. So I think there are people who have maybe different strengths and weaknesses that I do when it comes to focusing. So I know people, for instance, that are much better than I am at just simply like working for long periods of time. So, I know we know in our kind of day-to-day life, I'm not actually working like 80 hours a week or having these like really intensive schedules. And so I can work intensively in a burst, but I know plenty of people that just pour more hours into their working life than I do. So I'm certainly on like that dimension of focus of like prioritizing work in my life. I'm rather unfocused compared to a lot of other people. Similarly, I can even think about Vat, who's in the room with us helping us film. He's very good at like the kind of task checklist, like this was on the to-do list for the day, therefore I'm going to work on it. Whereas I go a lot more on my gut of like, what do I feel like working on today? So in that sense, I'm worse at.
But your jobs are also very different, so
That's
I don't know
true,
if it's fair to
but
compare.
but to sort of like narrow your compliment of like maybe what I'm good at is that I've realized that one of the things that I am good at is that if there is an important big project or task,
Mm.
I'm able to kind of obsess over it a little bit and stay focused on it for long periods of time and put in longer sessions. And so kind of the like Cal Newportian deep work on a single project is the thing that I think I am relatively good at, even though that I think as a kind of byproduct of that means that I'm sometimes a little bit flippant about doing small tasks. So that was my productivity month challenge, is that like I'm bad at like, oh, there's this thing that needs to be fixed in the house, and then it's just been on the to-do list for months and I just haven't gotten around to it. Or like some little work task that's like, it doesn't need to be done immediately and it's not like some super big priority. It just often falls through the cracks for me. So I think understanding my own personality and productivity profile has been important in this, because I think everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and you design systems to kind of take advantage of your strengths and make your weaknesses matter less. And I think that's maybe an underrated part of thinking about this. It is not just about like there's one size fits all productivity system that works for everyone, but it's like, well, what are my individual strengths and weaknesses, and how do I like get the most out of the thing that I'm good at and make the thing that I'm not so good at either not matter, or I've got some scaffolding in some ways so that it doesn't have like really negative consequences.
Yeah. And but okay, I'll give you a scenario here.
Yeah.
Of this chaotic day. So you have like, I don't know, you have a very important project that you're
Okay.
working on at work, but then you're also volunteering as like, I don't know, a coach, and then you also have like a shopping list to do,
Okay.
and maybe meals to plan for the week, or some cooking,
Mhm.
cleaning at the house. You're planning a family vacation. You have to have a serious conversation about something with a
Wow, this is quite the day.
exactly. But all of
Yeah.
these things, well, I don't know, is
Right.
it just me that has like a mental
Yeah.
checklist of so
Yeah.
many different things at the same time? So how do you not get distracted by all that, or how do you deal with that in the background while you're trying to also prioritize the current project that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is a bit of a trade-off here. So, one of the things that we often don't talk about is the sort of like the sort of necessary side effect of a certain kind of behavior. So I think the more you are kind of single-minded and a little bit obsessive about projects and things like that, then sort of as a consequence, the more some of these other lower priority items
You ignore it.
kind of fall through the cracks a little
Yeah.
bit. So it means that, if you are being extremely diligent and focused on your one project, then yeah, like sometimes you do pass over that outing with friends, or you are a little bit more hasty with your meal prep, or you do just like the just good enough job for something else. And so I think, in some cases, the obstacle we have in revising our approach is not just an issue of self-control or discipline, where it's sort of like, well, I got to avoid doing this lazy thing. It's also recognizing I've got to avoid doing this thing that by my own standards is good, right? Like that I should be doing it. So, like an example we could talk about is like doing an extremely thorough job cleaning the house every week. That's something that for a lot of people is an important value of theirs, that like they keep the house really tidy. But if it uses up all of your spare time, which you could be using to some important project, there is like a certain trade-off there. And so for some people, the reason they can't focus on the project is like, but I spent too much time playing video games, or I was just on my phone for hours. And so there is like this waste that you could just contract and then you could do it. But for other people, it's like the thing that's hard for them to admit or recognize is that, well, I can work on this project, but it's going to be by not doing this other thing that I myself think is important.
Right.
And so that's the prioritization element of the focus that I think it is definitely challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever done something strange, like in the name of focus? Like, have you ever done? Do you remember a time when you've just like, what is the strangest thing you've ever done
Strangest thing.
or I don't
Where
know.
do I begin with my strange behavior?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think, well, I know one thing that was like, I don't know how strange this is, but it was something that I was doing for a while. I can think especially like in my kind of child-free 20s, like this is not something I could do these days, but I would like wake up, and then within 5 minutes of waking up, I would start working, and I would work for a little while before I have breakfast, which is a kind of weird behavior, I guess. Like when I was doing the MIT challenge, what my plan was like, I'm going to wake up at 6, and then like at like 6:05, or I don't know whether it was 7 or 6 I was waking up, but I'd wake up and it would be like I would be in bed and then I would just like sit up in my bed and then like start reading the book, which is like I think a weird behavior for a
Yeah.
lot of people. But the reason I liked it is that there's this like whole inertia to getting the day started. And if
Mhm.
you just begin immediately, then like you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to take a break to have breakfast and have a shower and do all that kind of stuff. But then it's a break. It's like, okay, now I get to have my little break and I'm having this little respite, but I've already started with it. And so, I mean, that's a little bit of an unusual behavior, maybe.
I've heard that a lot from writers or
Mm,
people I've like the writers that have been interviewed, especially in the beginning of their careers, where maybe they were working full time or they were trying to find time to write. A lot of writers say that as soon as they wake up in the morning, that's when they put in their time
yeah.
to write. I mean, I've also heard of books being written on the bus or the train or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So I think that was probably really good that you were doing that for years. I think it made you very diligent
Well,
and
it was for that particular project. So I wouldn't say I've done that like across the
always,
board.
yeah. When was
I
it?
certainly,
MIT? When?
yeah, that was like, 10 years ago when I was doing this MIT challenge. Well, the idea was just in my head, I was like, I'm going to need to study like 10 hours in the
Right.
day. And like, that's so much studying. I was like, how do I do it in such a way that I preserve enough free time in
Yeah.
the day that it just doesn't feel like totally oppressive? And my solution was, well, if I do it from
Yeah.
like 6 to 6 with breaks, I'm getting this like impressive amount of studying in, but like
Mhm.
after 6, I'm essentially free. So every day I do get that proper rest.
Yeah.
So that was just a bit of an extreme example, but
Yeah.
I think other examples like I don't know. Certainly, you just like sit down and you just read for 5 hours straight is something that I think a lot of people maybe struggle with. But that's something
There's
that's been
no way I can read
that's
for
been a
five
major
hours.
component of like of the work that I do, in
Yeah.
research and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and no, I've heard that about athletes as well, like basketball players or
Mm,
people that are, professionally an athlete. They would
yeah.
why
Yeah. Yeah. No.
no,
No. No. Yeah. Yeah.
a professional athlete.
Professional athlete. Yeah.
They would instead of waking up at like I don't know 8 9 in the morning and going for practice at 10, they would wake up at 4 in the morning and then would have a practice. At
Mm,
6 in the morning, and then another practice at lunch, and then another practice, and so then instead of squeezing in 2 practices in a day, they would have 3 practices, and then they would make them just better and better
yeah.
in the sport. So waking up early and starting your work early in the morning, I think it is very
Well,
productive.
definitely the waking up early part of it, I think that's not too unusual in the sense like if you Google online like
Yeah,
what are ways to be more productive? I mean, like waking up early is like a time honored tactic.
yeah,
I think just shifting the hours of the day earlier has a lot of benefits for focus because typically speaking, there's fewer social demands earlier in the
mhm,
morning. Current life with small children notwithstanding, if you live by yourself, typically it's not until you get to the office that you're dealing with the like social hubbub of like meetings and emails. But like if you're on your computer at 6, usually no one's bugging you for a little while, so you have this stretch of focus. So it's often a time that you can inject for personal projects. It also occurs early in the day, so you're not so like kind of ground down by the day that okay, I can't start seriously focusing now, which I think is something that plagues a lot of people if they try to do it at like 8 p.m. So I know it's a time honored strategy. I think the thing that I was more kind of selecting was this idea. A lot of people have a rule in their head that like, well, they have to get ready for the day. And then
mm,
that can be some, period of time that's like half an hour.
yeah.
I mean,
While
I
you're
like doing that
showering or
now.
brushing your
I do that now.
teeth,
So I'm not
yeah,
saying that this is like,
you
this is the way I
you
live all the time. But I think it's one of those things that, it's an option. Like if you know you
mhm,
have to do this thing, you have very little time and you need to focus on it. The like, well, just wake up and do it for 2 hours, um, is often a very successful strategy. So I have used it in the past, even though I'm not doing it currently as of this moment.
yeah.
Hmm.
How do you stay motivated when you realize you've focused on something that's turned out to be a waste of time?
Yeah. Ooh, that's so hard. And I think, we were just talking about this even before the recording started about how important motivation and like self efficacy is that like, in some ways coming up with the ideal strategy or like what would a person do if they were like a robot and could just execute? What would they do? I mean, when you talk to people and you get them to put them in that frame of mind, I mean, sometimes the problem is that you just don't have knowledge of the correct strategy, but like it's not usually like the correct strategy is super surprising. It's just that, oh, that's going to be difficult for me to execute because it's going to require a lot of work. And there's this real catch 22 of motivation that if you have a lot of confidence that your plan's going to work and you're going to be able to succeed at it, and succeeding at it is going to be so good for your life, and you're enthusiastic and like you've been compelled by victory after victory, like it's very easy to be like, yeah, let's do it. And you're like going for it. Whereas if you've had a lot of setbacks and you have a lot of doubt and uncertainty and you're not sure whether it would succeed if you did it, you're not sure whether you have the capacity to stick to the plan and then all of these things kind of chip away at your motivation. And then you're kind of starting each day with a like, well, what's the point? Like, why do I even bother doing this? Which makes it hard to summon motivation. So I do think there's two ways to think about it, and they're not like easy solutions, but they're how I've thought about it in the past. So the first one is that seeing as it's this kind of catch 22 that like you need the motivation to succeed at the project, but if you don't succeed at projects, you don't have the motivation. It sort of implies that you want to bootstrap your self-efficacy through these sort of smaller projects. So if you've been feeling really ground down lately, you need to pick smaller projects, smaller periods of focus, more achievable goals, and like slowly rack up the wins in your track record. So I found for me, one of the things that really got me started in this whole sort of self-improvement journey when I was a teenager was doing a lot of 30-day trials. This is a technique comes from I learned it from Steve Pavlina, but the idea of the 30-day trial I thought was really good because first of all, they're usually behaviorally oriented. So it's like, I'm going to follow this habit for 30 days. And so automatically it becomes a situation of like, if I just commit to it, I will actually achieve it, as opposed to like, I'm going to make a certain amount of money or pass some exam, in which case the outcome doesn't totally depend on your effort. You may pick something that just happens to be impossible, or you may just be unlucky when you're doing it, in which case, success isn't guaranteed. And then second of all, because they're only 30 days, they have this, you can suspend your disbelief in the thing working to stick to it to the end of the month. So even if it's like 1 week in, you're like, wow, this is a total disaster, you can still get to the end of the month and kind of commit to that one period. So I found this very helpful for me in the beginning of like building my self-efficacy. I don't think it totally translates to every other pursuit in life, but if you're really starting from this place of self-doubt and low motivation and confidence, just being like, okay, I'm going to try to read every day. I'm going to try to exercise every day. And you just build up these general habits can be like, yeah, maybe I can accomplish something that's more difficult. So that would be the first thing.
Yeah.
The second
I
thing.
have a comment on
Oh,
this
sure.
as
You go
well.
first. Yeah.
Let me give
I'll
you
keep
the
my other
comment.
idea. Yeah.
Another thing too is that often you're starting from scratch. So
Yeah.
you haven't even learned it and you haven't even gotten any feedback. I read in this book too sometime that this guy gave this idea of it was like a salesman tactic where you're in sales and you have to make a certain amount of phone calls, and most of the time what you're hearing is no. And you have these two jars and you put one jar of pins or whatever it is, and then the other jar is empty. And as you're making these phone calls, you're just transferring the pins in the other jar. And your whole goal of doing this exercise is to just transfer over the pins. And you're not thinking so much of the no's or how the conversations are going, because eventually you're hoping that you're going to get that sale. But it doesn't happen. And you can definitely get discouraged very quickly if all you're hearing is no. But if your focus is all like, okay, I got these 50 pins in this jar and that's what I have to do. I have to make 50 calls, and that's my focus, and I'm not focusing on anything else.
Yeah, definitely focusing on inputs, I think, can be helpful in this sort of equation. So if like you have low self-efficacy with respect to a particular goal, like you're writing a book and you don't know whether it would be successful, you're starting a business and you don't know whether anyone's going to buy your product, this kind of thing, then like shifting the equation to like, well, I need to put in sufficient input. So like I need to like sit down and have enough deep work hours of writing, or I need to contact enough potential clients, or I need to do X, Y, or Z, which is definitely within my power to do, can be helpful with focusing. But the second thing I wanted to talk about was not just this idea of like bootstrapping confidence, but also being careful picking projects on account of your motivation too. So when you were saying like, how do you stay motivated to like be focused on projects where you don't feel motivated to do them. The lesson I've learned in life is like, whenever possible, really try to avoid doing that. Like, really try to avoid picking a goal which requires you to have in a really long extended period where you have to do something you're really unmotivated to do. And I know that that's like a pretty hard constraint on the things that you choose in life, because sometimes it's like, well, I could do this, but I have to go through this like long period of this kind of like awful thing before I can do it. Um, and I don't want to say that you can always avoid it in life. There's certainly going to be cases where like the only way forward is to like kind of dig yourself out of the muck, so to speak. But very often in life, we're confronted with a wide range of opportunities. And so if you can pick ones that are also managed to align with like, yeah, but I have positive feelings and motivation about this, at least in the beginning. I don't want to say that like, you're going to sustain this high of like, I'm always super motivated from day one till the end of the project. But at least when you're beginning projects, when you're beginning a commitment, if it starts with, oh, I'm excited about this, like those projects are just going to be so much easier to execute upon, that even if the opportunity is like slightly less, it may have better kind of like expected value to pursue those sort of projects. So for me, when I'm picking projects, that's like a primary criterion for picking it, is like, how excited am I about this project? Like when I was starting this foundations project last year, like that was one of the things that really compelled me to do it, was that I was really excited about it. I was like, yeah, I'm really looking forward to like reading a dozen books each month on each of these topics, and, working on my habits, and like the idea excited me. And so I knew that because it excited me, kind of irrespective of like whether it's a good project by some kind of objective basis, I knew that like my sheer enthusiasm for the project was going to mean that like I was going to be able to execute on it better. Whereas other projects that people have like suggested to me, like, oh, you should do this, or you should do that, it's like, but I'm not excited about them. So like, there's no way that I would be successful at it. Like every once in a while, people will like emailing me about, oh, you should do this project, usually because they want to do it. And then they like, I don't know why they want me to do it, but like, it'd be like, this thing that I want to accomplish, could you accomplish it first so I could watch it? I don't know. But like people will be like, or they'll pick something that they think would be like a better project for me on some objective measure. Like, well, you should really
I don't want
like some people are like, well, you should really like spend, some time getting good at chess. Cause like, chess is more objective maybe than some of the projects I've picked. And that would be like a better proving ground for some of these learning techniques. And yeah, maybe that's true, but I just like don't have nearly enough enthusiasm in chess to do that. So I just like, I see those projects and I'm like, yeah, but this would just fail because I'm not like, I don't like chess enough
Yeah.
to want to do this project. So, I mean, I think when we're evaluating projects, like it is a little bit more complicated than that, but I do think sometimes people don't take that factor into an account, that like even when you're pursuing a particular goal that has a particular aim, often there's different ways you can approach it that will change your motivation. So like even just approaching something as an experiment versus as a like trying to accomplish a particular goal can change how you feel about it emotionally.
Yeah.
So if it's sort of like, well, I'm going on this sort of project to see whether or not I can stick with it versus like to accomplish this particular goal. And if I don't, then I'm going to feel bad. Like even that framing can change how excited you are. So I think, to go back to that first question, like given how important motivation is for execution and for focus, to the extent that you have some degrees of freedom in choosing how you think of a project, or in terms of thinking about which projects you pursue in life, I do think it makes a difference.
Yeah. And going back to, you were mentioning how many books you've been reading and how excited you were about this project. But when it comes to reading books, at
Mhm.
what point is it like, okay, stop reading all these books about this topic and just get to work? Like, do you think too many
Yeah.
books can be almost, I don't know, bad for starting
Well,
something? And also too, like
yeah,
if you're reading specific books about a certain topic, they can
yeah,
be contradictory of each
yeah,
other. So when do you know that it's enough? Like, okay,
yeah.
I've read a couple of books, let's get this started.
Yeah, this is going to be my contrarian point for today, but I think that overwhelmingly people read too little and learn too little and are too like lacking of intellectual curiosity and are too pragmatically focused in their life. Now, I know this is not a popular opinion, because if you go online, everyone's like, I spend too much time researching. That's like everyone's self-diagnosed problem. And then like you ask them like what they've read,
Yeah.
and it's like maybe a few articles in like one book or something. And I'm like, it just did baffles me that this is like people's self-diagnosis. Now, I'm not saying that you need to read as many books as I'm reading on a particular topic. I think I have maybe like it's easier for me to read books and
Yeah.
I enjoy it more. And so it's easier for me to do. But to me, acquiring knowledge about something and acting are separate, but they're mostly complementary. They're not mostly antagonistic. So it can be the case that if you're pursuing a goal where the action is particularly unpleasant, let's say you have some fear or anxiety, or it's just a really unpleasant task, and you want to feel like you're doing something, you can do reading as a way of like kind of mildly satisfying that urge. And so there can be a bit of substitution. But to me, I think that misses the more obvious case, which is that if there's something unpleasant or difficult about this activity, then the sort of, well, I'm reading as a way of procrastinating on that. The real way to procrastinate on it is just to ignore it entirely. So like the person for whom, okay, I really need to start exercising. This is a big problem in my life, but I have this unpleasant association with exercising. Like to me, the it's very rare that that person is also reading tons of books about exercise. Like they just have like a library of books about fitness and they know everything about fitness and they're
But they're
doing
not.
nothing about it. No, they just don't read anything about fitness and then they don't have to think about how they're not achieving their goal at all. So to me, this is like constantly being brought out as like a reason not to read books because, well, people are, they're not taking action. They need to do this. And like, by all means, I do think it's very good to like treat action as something that you do alongside reading. So like in all of these projects and in the course that we're doing that runs along it, we basically are like, okay, you get started on the Keystone habit immediately, and then we're dripping out lessons. And similarly for me, like I'm trying to get started on a behavior immediately before I read all the books and decide what's the best thing. And sometimes that means you make mistakes. You have some initial idea that this is what I'm going to do, and then you go halfway through and you're like, oh, I learned more about it and I'm going to change my behavior, change my approach. But that's why reading and learning and doing are complementary. So I don't know, this is just one area, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm psychologically abnormal and so I don't experience the world the way other people do. But my feeling is that, like, broadly speaking, people read and learn way too little for their goals, in that like they would probably achieve better actions if they knew more about the thing that they were trying to work on. And that virtually everyone I know who is quite successful in a domain is also super knowledgeable about it. So the idea that there's like people who are just like, men and women of action and they don't read all those stuffy books and they're the ones who really know things. Like every entrepreneur I know in the industry of their choice and the thing they do is extremely knowledgeable, that is successful. Like I don't know anyone who just like, oh yeah, I don't read anything or do anything. I just do everything through trial and error. So to me, this is just one area where I just like really disagree with the
I'm
consensus.
so happy I asked this because I knew exactly.
Yeah, you know what I was going to say. This is a leading question, ladies and gentlemen.
But I don't
She's
know.
getting me all worked up, but that's she knew what she
Get
knew.
to see the real Scott.
To push, right? Okay.
Okay. And okay, a little bit more lighthearted, I hope. What about distractions?
Yeah.
How do you see distractions? Do you think distractions are sometimes good or necessary?
Yeah.
Do they mean that maybe you need a break?
Yeah.
And also, is there any distractions that you don't really feel guilty about?
Okay, sure. So, well, first of all, I think we can all kind of agree on some level that if you're doing something that's mentally demanding and kind of, it's really important you do it well, it's better to be in a distraction-free environment. And I would say that in some ways the research sort of suggests that we're worse multitaskers than we think we are. So the kid who's studying with music on in the background or with the TV on in the background because it's more enjoyable, it is really limiting this person's performance much more than they realize. Like we don't even realize how much those interruptions are interfering with us. So in that sense, I really agree with the kind of like Cal Newport take that like we fail to cultivate deep work because we sort of underestimate how important it is to be focused in order to accomplish tasks.
Right.
Now, that being said, I don't think that our brains are just defective and that we would all be better if we were like 100% on the focus end of things. clearly there's a place for being distracted and for allowing randomness and various things to enter into our minds. And, our distractibility is not just a bug, it's a feature of our lives. And so I do think it's important to be able to like turn on focus, but that doesn't mean that you like want it on perpetually. Right. And so I do think it's important to be distracted and to like allow random things to encounter and, to encounter new information and conversations with people. And so I think once you sort of totally turn off that spigot of serendipity and new information, you also become stale because you only have the stock of ideas that you've either directly come across or directly suggested by your goals. So I think distraction in that sense is like it's a complement. Like you need to have distraction and focus. Distraction maybe not even the right word there because distraction just I think just has a negative connotation. So in this sense, it's sort of more like uh, randomness or spontaneity or these kinds of more positive ways of describing the same thing. And so for me, I feel like I think it's good for me to have at any part of my day like times where I'm reading random blogs or following down some like rabbit hole of like links about things for new
Mhm.
information because yeah, sometimes it's a waste of time and I need to get on task. But often it like teaches me something that like I just could not have found through a more goal directed process because it would never have occurred to me to like ask the question that the information is giving the answer to. And
Right.
so I think you need to have both. And I think also recognizing like when you're in a focus part of your life where it's sort of like, okay, I know what I need to do. I just need to like clear the distractions and like sprint to the finish line versus I don't know what goal I should be aiming for. I need to like have more input so that I have better options. I think recognizing when you're in that like explore, exploit, um, like which mode you need to be in your life is very important too.
But don't you also think that it's important for us to be able to turn off our focus
Yeah.
as well? Right? Isn't don't you think that's like healthy for us?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're working and you're focused on projects that are really important and you feel like you're doing valuable work. But sometimes you need to take a break and be with your family or you need to go on a holiday.
Yeah.
And how do you do that, right? How do you just for a week turn off everything and not think about those things that you've been so focused on?
Yeah. I mean, I think the ideal, if we're just sort of say like what would be the ideal way to approach this kind of problem is that it's like you focus really hard when you need to focus and then you completely disengage when you're not focused. So, I think anyone who knows Cal Newport, a good friend of mine who's sort of the key expert on this, this is clearly how he tries to live his life. He has this idea of like, shutting down his day, fixed schedule productivity. So this is like the first thing he'll admit is that like deep work is not the idea that you should just be in this continual state of depth with your work nonstop, because not only is that psychologically unsustainable, but it's probably self-defeating. It's not a way that you can actually approach it. So the ideal is depending on the task, maybe you're only actually doing 3 to 4 hours of deep work per day, but they're really focused, you get it done, and then you're not thinking about it. And then you actually can be disengaged with your kids and, with your hobbies and other sorts of pursuits. And so I think in some ways, like what I think the ideal is of a focused life is this kind of like you're hyper productive when you're working, but you actually don't work a lot. And that the opposite, which is this sort of like constant state of low grade work, is the
Hmm.
worst of both
Yeah.
worlds. But that's the one that we often settle into either because we like slowly start trying to add to our work schedule. And so we chip away at our focus, or even just the kind of social conformity pressure of like, well, you need to be looking busy. You need to be looking like you're doing something. And because there's that pressure to like appear busy, because it's unsustainable for you to actually be focused for that entire busy period, you just end up with this kind of like, well, I'm at my desk sort of doing low grade work. And so I think that's like a very negative equilibrium that we frequently get ourselves into. And I don't want to say it's easy to get out of it, but I do think it's useful to keep in mind that like the ideal state that we're talking about is not perpetual focus, but is this kind of like actually maybe in total time you're working less, but it's very concentrated when you're doing it.
Yeah. And do you think do you have any lessons about focus that you had to learn the hard way?
Yeah. Hmm. I think, well, I think a lesson that I learned pretty early on, so I don't want to say this is like a recent mistake, but I learned pretty on is that projects, so we're talking about focus at the larger scale now, not about at the, moment to moment, am I looking at my phone or am I working scale, but in this sort of macro scale, uh, projects are almost always harder than you think they'll be when you're planning them. And so I hate to say this, but this is like my most common piece of advice. And it's just, it feels weird continually repeating it to people because I just keep having people being like, but what about me? Like I'm the exception or something. And my piece of advice is like, you should only really have like one project at a time. And then like every day I get emails from people being like, but I have these 2, 3, 4 projects that are all really important and I need to do all of them at once. And like, so like, can I do that? And like, I mean, obviously you can do whatever you want. Like I'm not your boss or something. Like, if you want to do 4 things at once, go ahead. But they're asking me for my advice of like, do I think that's a good idea? And, I can imagine there's some scenarios where it is impossible to not do the multiple projects at once. Like if you think of you're a traditional university student and you're enrolled in 5 classes, it's not possible to do one class at a time. You actually have to do them in that order. That's just the way it works. And so there's going to be some juggling of the priorities of your different classes. I do think that's easier in a more structured environment. And so similarly at work, your boss may not give you a choice. You may have 3 or 4 projects you have to allocate time on, maybe because sometimes you're idling or because they all are important or just because your boss doesn't agree with this theory of mine. And so then you don't have a choice, right? So I don't want to say that you can have 100% control over this, but inevitably this is not students in this case where this is forced upon them. They are making a choice between 3 self-initiated and started projects. And when I get them to describe the projects, like there's no logical reason why they have to be done simultaneously. It's just this person cannot bear to imagine like the FOMO of not doing one of them. And I think the thing that's hard to realize and hard for, a lesson that I've even learned myself is that um, it's very hard to say no to this attractive opportunity and to focus on one thing until either it gets to completion or some kind of milestone where you can disengage. But again, we just overestimate our capacity to finish this. So it's sort of like, I would say it's simultaneously true that, that I get so many emails about students who have like 3 or 4 projects and like, can I do, like the equivalent of the MIT challenge, but then also work this job and also do this other thing. But then at the same time, like the amount of people that actually accomplish even serially most of their hard projects is pretty low, right? So it's one of those things where, I'm trying to do 2 things at once that even done on their own have like a more than 50% failure rate. To me is a kind of like, it just to me just represents this a little bit of not self-delusion, but just kind of a cognitive illusion about how focus works and how much is necessary in order to accomplish difficult things. So I think that's one of the lessons that like early on, I think I made that mistake. And fortunately, I've kind of like disabused myself of like, no, you really need to do one thing at a time. And so even though, this thing seems exciting, it's like, no, I got to wait till this project's finished before I can start it. I mean, that's been a really beneficial kind of rule I've had for myself.
Yeah. And focusing on one thing too, I think sometimes focusing on just your relationship is also a focus,
Yeah.
right? So because you're not at work and you're not focusing on a project, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on your family life,
Yeah.
and that because you're not working, something else becomes your focus. And I don't think it's fair to also be distracted while you're doing that as well. Like for example, right now, because our kids are little, my choice is to only work part-time. So I have days with the kids, especially now because it's summertime and they're also not at school, where it's just me and the kids,
Yeah.
and you're at work and I'm at home. And so I have kind of given myself that the task is when I'm at home, they're my focus.
Yeah.
And my focus is to just be with them, play games with them, and create this meaningful time together. And I think that also counts. I think your relationships also count as like
Yeah.
focusing on being with your family is also focus. It doesn't mean that you should constantly be distracted by your phone or the
Yeah.
TV or whatever else, right? I think that also plays a big part in
Well,
in this topic.
that's a really good point, because I remember having a conversation with someone in the course we were talking about this. And uh, one of the things that I realized is that like we have this kind of I don't even know whether it's cultural. It's maybe more like biological or instinctive, but we have this sort of impulse control problem where, yes, we know we should be like working on that really important business report, but it's so much easier to like check our email or do some kind of like other task
Yeah.
instead. And so we're sort of fighting a little bit that urge to do that. But I realized that even at the level of like, what should you focus on? So not like, should you work on this business report? There's this huge influence of cultural scripts that have these assumptions baked in that are often not really analyzed critically. So one of the things that came up, so the sort of keystone habit for this month was picking a daily highlight. So that means, of all your daily to-do list, like you single out one that like, I'm going to set aside some time for that and like really make sure I get that done. Given the fact that, experience has taught us that just because you put everything on a daily to-do list doesn't mean you get everything done. So this is a useful step, given the fact that very frequently you're not getting every single thing done on your list. What's the thing that really matters that you get it done? So I think this is a useful habit. I learned it from Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky's book, Make Time. Now, one of the things that I talked about is that if you have this daily highlight, you can kind of see like what your daily highlight is every single day for, let's say, like a month. And that gives you also a snapshot of, okay, well, what did I actually decide to focus on? So looking back at sort of like not at the second to second level, but on the day by day level, what was my focus? What was I actually focusing on? Just the same way that if you had like a little stopwatch, you could be like, what did you actually spend time on today? And then be like, oh, wow, I actually wasted a lot of time because I had this self-control problem. You could do the same thing and be like, what did I actually pick as my highlight most days? And one of the things that came up in this course is that for a lot of us, we feel compelled to make them work things or like productive things. Like the highlight needs to be that. And that we feel almost some resistance or guilt if the focus is like family or it's friends or it's some self-care activity or this kind of thing. And I'm not to say that like, obviously we spend a lot of our lives working. And so it makes sense that work would be the focus for a lot of days. But to me, this is like, it's a real cultural assumption that making your daily highlight or your daily focus or whatever priority was of the day work every single day of your life is actually what makes life better for you and for other people. Like this is the thing that you should actually be pursuing if you were to like step back and reflect on like, well, what am I actually trying to accomplish over my entire life? It maybe doesn't look like work being the focus every single day. Now, I don't know. It could depend on your scenario. If you're in like an ambitious profession and you're trying to make a name for yourself, like maybe there's going to be some sprint for your career where work really does need to be the focus. But I think for a lot of people, they're on autopilot, like they've hit that kind of, let's say that sort of cruising altitude in their career. They're not really expecting to make huge new accomplishments. They don't really desire huge new accomplishments. Yeah. And there are other pressing problems in their life. Like maybe their health is a little bit of a mess. Maybe they're having problems with their relationships or some other part of their life, but they can't help themselves. They just have to make work the priority every single day. And to me, that's kind of like, it's like taking the focus problem that happens moment to moment and just bumping it up a level. Like that we have this, in this case, a cultural script that encourages us to allocate our attention on something that, if we thought about it, step back and reason about it, is not what we actually want all the time. And so I think focus is ultimately inseparable from this like question about what do you really value in life and what do you think will actually make your life better?
And it's not always about materialistic things as
No.
well. Like sometimes you focus on something just out of pure joy,
Yeah.
just because it makes you happy. And that's okay, right?
Or even things that aren't productive, like they have instrumental purposes. So like, I'll give an example for myself. So when I was younger and I had a lot more kind of leisure time, spare time, I was a lot better at like keeping up with colleagues for work. So I'd like, I can remember days, this is like back in the days when people use Skype. I would just have Skype open sometimes and I would just like ping a friend and be like, hey, what are you working on? And it was very like unproductive. Like these are not accomplishing any goals. These were not tasks for like, okay, we're going to like set up some meeting to do a joint venture or something. It was just like chit chat. But this kind of general sustaining conversation that I had with a lot of my network, it did lead to opportunities for my business. It did lead to ideas. It did lead to me being like learning about things in my industry, which ended up making my career the way it is today. And then, as I got older, my business got bigger. There became more pressing tasks, more kind of like, well, this needs to get done. that was one of the first things to get shaved off because I was like, well, I'm just too busy today. I don't have time to do that. And so it's, I'm not just speaking to the audience here about like, oh, everyone needs to be doing this and I'm some kind of paragon of virtue here. It's recognizing myself that like I have a script that like writing an essay is productive, but like me having a meandering conversation with some colleague is not productive. Like that's kind of just for enjoyment or a bit of a waste of time. And so similarly, you can have this sort of idea that like, yeah, having the like going out for drinks with coworkers after the day's done, like that's not work, and that what you're doing at the office is work. And that's true to some limited extent, but it's probably also the case that like having good relationships with these people, hearing about what they're working on, like that information flow is also important, even just from the context of succeeding in your work, not to mention that you have other values in life. So I think this focusing problem, again, if you're unreflective towards it, I think you can very much optimize yourself for one thing, which is not necessarily what you want in life either.
Exactly. I really like that. The last thing I wanted to ask you is, what does it mean to settle?
To settle, yeah. So this was one of the books that I read. It was called On Settling. It's one of these very like philosophical books where he like goes through the dictionary and like goes through all the definitions of settling. But the idea that drew me to the book was that settling and striving are not like opposites, but they're necessary complements of each other. So when we think about striving, for instance, we're like trying to improve a situation, we're trying to optimize it. Whereas when we're settling, I think the word sort of implies not optimizing. It means like this is good enough for now. If you weren't settling, that you are not like picking something where
Right.
maximizing, optimizing is not the best possible. You're
Yeah.
picking something and like sticking with it,
I
even
think
if it's
most
not the
people,
best,
when they
right?
hear settle, they have a
Yeah.
negative emotion towards it,
Um,
right?
yeah, or it could be kind of like it has this like finality to it. But I think the thing that I really liked about the book is that even in our striving, we must settle. So in striving towards some goal, you must settle on the object of your striving. So you must decide this is the goal I will pursue and not other goals. And so this goes back, I think, to my conversation about the students who email me about like how they must absolutely work on these 4 things simultaneously. It's because they don't realize that you have to settle to strive.
Mhm.
That you don't realize that in order to choose one thing to try your earnest at, or to focus hardest at, or to try your best at, you must by necessity choose. There's all these other things that could have been better that you're not going to do. And so I think that they're actually much more deeply intertwined and linked than people
Yeah.
realize. And that, to the extent that you have a positive attitude towards striving, you must also have a positive attitude towards settling, because they are sort of necessary complements of each other.
That's so great. I like that. I like that a lot. Any last thoughts? Any last advice on
Yeah.
people that want to have a focused and good life?
Well, I mean, they can definitely check out the books that I reviewed. There's lots of good books there. It's not just my advice on focus that are out there. So, highly recommend looking at some of those books that include not only the philosophy of focus, but some of the very interesting psychology and neuroscience before it. So, we'll have a link to some of the books that I read this month on this topic and have linked to in those notes. And also, this is the 10th month. So, we have 2 more conversations to go. We're sort of nearing the final stretch of the project. The next month, we're going to be dealing with organization, which is about, ensuring sort of efficiency and tidiness and proper working of your physical space, which I'm looking forward to talking about because this is going to be a very interesting project for us to undertake as well.
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
really excited for that one.
So thank you for joining us, and
Thank you.
hopefully we will see you in the next month.